There's the recording.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, welcome to Coming Out with Cannabis with your host, Christina, the Archangelo Pooler, and Wayne Kelly. Today, fans, we finally caught up with Patrick Nightingale. We're super excited about this conversation. Had great conversation before the recording. Patrick is the partner at Cannabis Legal Solutions, medical marijuana. Oh, I'm sorry, this is my note. He is the PA medical marijuana. I got it all mixed up here, fans. Patrick, look at all I got written down here for you. Anyway, so PA attorney extraordinaire, that's my note. He is the executive director of the Medical Cannabis Society, executive director of Pittsburgh NORML, and we are super excited to have you with us today. I know we're going to talk about some great stuff. But first,
thank you so much for having me on.
No problem. CDP.
Good morning, everyone. Today is yet another gloomy day here in Pennsylvania with rain, clouds. I don't know where the hell we live, under a mushroom somewhere. I don't know. But we're so happy to have Patrick on today. There's a lot of things that Patrick's doing to support the medical cannabis community, not only from the nonprofit sector through Pittsburgh NORML, but then the for-profit sector as an attorney practicing in this very important space to be in, especially with patients' rights being jeopardized on a daily basis. So welcome, Patrick, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. I look forward to discussing some very important issues that we as patients here in the Commonwealth face every single day.
We're excited about this conversation. Fans, before we started recording, we were talking about DUI laws. We're talking about carry permit. The conversation is great. We expect it to continue here today. So let's start that conversation, Patrick, and go right into the DUI laws and what are patients facing here in Pennsylvania, not only here in PA, but across the nation as medical marijuana patients.
Well, here in Pennsylvania, our DUI law, it places us at risk of being prosecuted and convicted of a DUI every single day that we're medical cannabis patients. In Pennsylvania, our DUI law was amended in 2004, and it calls for zero tolerance for any Schedule I metabolites. Now, if it's a cocaine metabolite, methamphetamine, opioids, those tend to metabolize out of the bloodstream relatively quickly. But as we know as cannabis consumers, carboxy-THC, the non-psychoactive metabolite of cannabis, can be detected in the blood for days, weeks, even months after cessation of use, depending on a consumer's frequency of use. That carboxy-THC under Pennsylvania law is sufficient to sustain a DUI conviction. What does this mean for patients? It means that if we are patients and we're using our medicine, we, under Pennsylvania law, are DUI 24/7, 365. It's very chilling. So any patient using their medicine has that cloud hanging over their head. The good news is that there is bipartisan support for amending Pennsylvania's DUI law to provide protections for Pennsylvania patients similar to a patient who has a Schedule II or a Schedule III controlled substance prescription from their physician. I have had the opportunity to propose some language to Representative Chris Rabb from the Philadelphia area, who is interested in introducing legislation to try to protect patients. And I note that on April 29th, when I testified before the Democratic Policy Committee in Harrisburg, a representative of the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association also acknowledged that there needs to be something to protect patients. Now, District Attorney Adams from, I believe, Berks County didn't go so far as to say he would decline or recommend declining prosecutions for patients if it was a metabolite-only DUI, but at least, we've got law enforcement, we've got lawmakers, both Republicans and Democrats, who are aware of this issue, who want to do something to protect patients. But it really is, it's unfortunate that this was something that we didn't even address in our medical cannabis law. Other states have per se limits. Colorado, for example, 5 nanograms per milliliter limit for operating a motor vehicle. That's a very low threshold. It would certainly suggest that it does not correspond with impairment in quite the same way that blood alcohol levels do, but at least it's not per se metabolites only conviction. And that's one thing that we need to address legislatively. And for our patient community, they need to understand that they have to be mindful of this. They have to protect themselves. They have to do whatever they can to avoid a law enforcement encounter. Right. The majority of police that I deal with, if the driver is not impaired, they're not trying to manufacture a DUI prosecution, simply because they find out that someone is in possession of cannabis or they're a medical cannabis patient. But some law enforcement do. I have had encounters with state troopers who feel very, very aggressive about this, and they don't care if there's any signs of impairment. As soon as there's any suggestion whatsoever that the individual might be a patient or might be in possession of cannabis, then it's a full DUI investigation that's taking place. And so, what can patients do to protect themselves? I know that one issue is, hey, if I drive to the dispensary, can a police officer just pull me over for leaving the dispensary? That's something that we've addressed in Pennsylvania with police, like waiting outside of a bar at 2 o'clock. It's called entrapment. They can't merely initiate a traffic stop because someone leaves a dispensary or someone leaves a bar. There has to be some type of motor vehicle violation that would justify a traffic stop, and then an investigation could proceed from there. So, our cannabis, medical cannabis community, make sure your vehicle is in proper working order. There are no taillights that are out. The license plate light, that's a fun one. I didn't even know that was, something that
I know.
Do, but I've seen traffic stops because the license plate light was not fully illuminated. License plate. Not using a turn signal, rolling through a stop sign, speeding. I would say speeding is something that is almost an everyman offense. People routinely will exceed the speed limit, but that is an excellent opportunity for a law enforcement officer to initiate a traffic stop. I would suggest, for example, that patients not travel. Obviously, don't drive impaired. If a person is visibly impaired, then that's going to be a DUI prosecution. And I would suggest to our patient community to avoid operating their motor vehicle at times when law enforcement are aggressively hunting alcohol DUIs. If you're a patient, you probably don't want to be driving around at 1 o'clock in the morning with medicine in your vehicle. You're almost at that point potentially inviting a law enforcement encounter because police are out at 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Happy hours, Patrick? Happy hours? People, going out after work for happy hours. When I worked at J&J back in the day, Remicade had tons of happy hours, right? Those guys always had all these happy hours, and you're coming out at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. So, police look for the happy hour people too. So, that's another thing. It's not just late night. You have to think about happy hour.
Yeah, then absolutely. Anywhere where there could be a suggestion that, hey, there are going to be motorists on the road right now because we believe that there is alcohol consumption going on, there's a real risk for a medical cannabis patient to be collateral damage, if you will. I don't think right now that law enforcement are aggressively hunting cannabis DUIs. And the reason I say that is because the volume of alcohol DUIs is far in excess to the volume of potential cannabis DUIs. There are simply far more people that consume alcohol than consume cannabis, and from my perspective as a former prosecutor and a defense attorney, DUIs, probably make up close to half of our criminal docket, and they're almost all alcohol DUIs. So that's where law enforcement's focus is. But when they have what they believe is an impaired driver who does not exhibit signs of alcohol intoxication, that's when they may call in a drug recognition expert to try to look for physical signs, things like eyelid tremors or a chalky tongue, or some things that.
What? I'm sorry.
A chalky tongue, like if your tongue's a little white, a little chalky.
Oh, no kidding. Huh.
Yep, I saw that in a police report as one of the things that the drug recognition expert was looking for.
Dry mouth.
I'm sorry?
dry mouth is another indication, like when someone has a dry mouth, right? And they're like, when they're talking because they have a dry mouth because they've consumed, that's another indication that the person has consumed cannabis with the dry mouth.
One of the strongest two things that I think is the biggest risks for patients. One is accidentally revealing your patient status. I have a patient that was prosecuted for a DUI because they pulled their patient identification out of their wallet instead of their driver's license. The officer saw patient status, said, "I believe that you maybe have THC in your system. I want to take you for a blood test." Metabolites, DUI prosecution. The other is the odor of fresh cannabis. The cannabis coming from our dispensaries are not packaged in airproof or airtight or smell-proof containers. You can smell it. So if you have that container in your car, in a bag next to you and you're driving home, there's certainly a risk that if there's a law enforcement encounter, that officer is going to smell the odor of fresh cannabis. My recommendation.
If I could interrupt 1 second, Patrick, because I want to address this also about the patients that work at dispensaries. So when they go home, like I know that when we go to a dispensary, we smell a little bit when we come out. And say you're working at a grower facility in Pennsylvania. I've been to Ilera's, Mecca in Fulton. And when I left, I wasn't anywhere, I wasn't even in the grow room or anything like that, but I smelled like cannabis. My purse, because it was a leather purse, it smelled like it for 2 weeks. And I don't carry stuff in my purse. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't do that. I'm so paranoid, literally paranoid about this. So what about those guys? The patients that work at a dispensary or the patients that work at a grow facility and automatically stink because they work there.
That's a real gray area right now. I have a case where a young man worked at a cultivation facility, was pulled over for speeding, certainly had a very strong odor of cannabis. The young man told the trooper where he worked, showed him his employee badge, and in my opinion, that should have been sufficient to demonstrate to the trooper that there was no violation of Pennsylvania law, no justification to continue the traffic stop. Unfortunately, in this case, the traffic stop progressed. There was a search, and contraband was recovered. Whether or not this is an appropriate case to litigate and to try to get it to the superior court level, that's another matter. There are other factors involved with this, but it's a very real issue. Now, he wasn't investigated or prosecuted for a DUI. It just turned into a drug prosecution. But it's a very real issue that patients who work in these facilities or the employees in these facilities, have a real risk of a prolonged law enforcement encounter. So what I would say to employees working at a cultivation facility or at a dispensary, make sure you don't have any contraband on you. And if you are not a patient, then, whether you're a consumer as a legal patient or not, just make sure you don't put yourself in a position where that officer believes that you may be under the influence of cannabis, and therefore that officer wants to conduct a DUI investigation. There will still be certain officers that don't care and will, forge ahead and, force that traffic stop, search the vehicle, possibly force a DUI investigation, and we're going to have to litigate that issue because, to my knowledge, so far nobody has litigated a traffic stop or a search based on the odor of fresh cannabis for someone who works in either a cultivation facility or a dispensary.
Hey, would it be good advice, thinking about your one case, would it be good advice to the patient to maybe keep their card in another location, not necessarily in their wallet? I don't know, Patrick. I mean, it's not like you don't know when you're going to the dispensary. You just grab your card and go. I don't keep mine. I mean, honestly, I do keep it near my license, so I'm going to move it. That's why I was just thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I keep my patient identification in a section of my wallet completely separate from my license. I have it buried under a bunch of other stuff, so I would have to work really hard to
I'm moving it now.
Reveal patient status. So
Dude, I'm
just
moving mine right now.
And just like a patient who's using prescription Schedule 2 or Schedule 3 medicines, if there's a law enforcement encounter, I'm not going to immediately say to that officer, I just want to let you know I've got a prescription for OxyContin. And the same should apply to medical cannabis patients.
Right.
There's no reason whatsoever to volunteer medical cannabis status to a law enforcement officer unless it is to demonstrate that the medical cannabis products that you are in possession of are lawfully owned or lawfully possessed. It's imperfect, but we need to make sure that our patient community is as educated as possible about protecting their rights and minimizing the possibility of a law enforcement encounter. And here's something to be mindful of. Nobody is training the police. The Department of Health is not providing any training. The police themselves really have no idea what the law says. I was just called by an old friend of mine who's now an instructor at the police academy here in Allegheny County, and he just had to ask me some very basic questions. He's like, listen, the training materials they gave us don't even show that dry leaf flower is legal now. What am I supposed to tell the guys in the academy? I'm like, well, let me give you some very practical answers, questions about paraphernalia, questions about original dispensary packaging, questions about DUI encounters, questions about what a patient's, maximum limit may be, what can they possess, and so on and so forth. And by and large, law enforcement is kind of shooting blind on this. The only thing that I'm aware that law enforcement is really, doubling down on, and that is training more drug recognition experts. Not training officers about patient protections under Act 16.
I have a question here, going back to, our conversation, about the patients and, driving. Christina, you mentioned it on our call previous to the recording, we were talking about someone who may be driving a car with, illegal tint, coming from the dispensary, so that patient has reason maybe to be concerned. And, myself, I did get pulled over for my tint. And all they were looking for was beer cans and alcohol, and Patrick, I was coming home from my parents, and I'm sitting in there. I just go over there for dinner every Thursday. Christina, you know that. I didn't have shoes on, didn't even have my wallet with me, and my dumbass, and Bruce, dumbass is okay, for fuck's sake is okay. So I just got an okay from Bruce, so for fuck's sake, I approved. It's an Irish proverb, but So I'm driving through my small town, Duncannon, no police protection at all. They don't have a community cop. So I saw the state cops sitting there, and I'm like, oh, hey, great. We have police protection. Boo! They turn on the lights right behind me. Like a dumbass, what am I doing? Waving to the cop. But I'm old town, Duncannon, lived there all my life. We don't have any cops, and I'm just happy because we have kids breaking into everything. There's heroin overdoses everywhere, and I'm like, oh, thank God there's the cops. Woo, woo, woo. And I'm sitting in my car with no shoes on, no wallet. They just come up, license, and I'm super clean. When I was young, I could always outrun the cops, but as far as driving, I've never had any problems. And so I was squeaky clean, nothing in the car. All they were really looking for was booze. No patient ID. They didn't ask me about that because they were unaware. And unlike some people that may be on this call that drives illegal tint, my tint is legal. I go right, I'm 28%, baby. So I asked, he pulled me over. I'm like, well, officer, could you measure that? Because I was told when I bought this car, the tint was legal. He broke it out 28% on the front window and left me go with the warning.
And, here's the thing with the tint stuff. I know too much about this because I am one of those people that has a lot of tint.
Oh, really? You? I wasn't even referring to you.
My truck and my Benz both, have tint. And, my husband too, even our smart car that pushes the race car down the lane has tint on it because it gets hot at the track in Cecil. But anyway, you have to check the calibration on those machines, the tint meters, because they don't always calibrate like they're supposed to. And so you can beat your tint ticket if the machine wasn't calibrated. In other words, they didn't send it in to get it calibrated. I figured this out because,
Gosh.
remember a couple years ago, I got pulled over when I moved the office to Spring City. And I was like, what? Now, Patrick, where I used to live in Spring City, it's like a population of like 15,000 people. It's very small.
Mhm.
And they knew, they knew where I was pulling out from, which was this big old warehouse they refurbed, and there were artists in there. And I was the only commercial, business person that wasn't an artist. So you saw me pull out, you know what I mean? And they just whoop, whoop, lit me up. And it was because of the tint. And I was like, do you have your tint, calibration records here? Because I know that this tint in this one is legal. So that's one piece of advice I can give people. I know that for a fact.
And it cycles back to what I said a little bit earlier. Make sure you know your vehicle is in proper operating order, because the easiest way to get pulled over, like I said earlier, a tail light is out, a headlight is out, you don't use a turn signal, a license plate light is out, or there's some other visible issue with your vehicle. Make sure you're inspected. Make sure your registration is current. Make sure you have proper insurance. Just make sure, if you are operating a motor vehicle, that you are doing everything that you possibly can to comply with all traffic laws and to make sure that your vehicle is in proper operating condition. And I would say to a patient, if they are concerned about it, go to your local mechanic, take it to the shop, and like, hey, I need a once over to make sure everything in my vehicle is running properly, so I don't run that risk of a chance law enforcement encounter because a taillight is out that I wasn't aware of.
Right.
By all means, don't be a dumbass and wave at the cop when you're walking by or driving by, for fuck's sake.
I am hopeful that the majority of our patient community does not have law enforcement encounters, have never, been charged with a crime, never been arrested. And, practically speaking, police run the gamut. There are some very aggressive, very black and white, by the book, officers out there. And there are some who are more flexible. Typically, if you're in a smaller community, a more rural location, you're probably going to encounter an officer that is not worried about street crime like we do in Pittsburgh or in Philadelphia. And that officer may have more time and may be directed by their corporal or their chief, to have a zero tolerance policy, if you will, where the same conduct in the city of Pittsburgh would be ignored. So, be mindful of your surroundings. If you're in a smaller town, in a smaller community, maybe those police departments have more time and energy to focus on small things like cannabis possession, because they're not worried about major, heroin trafficking in their jurisdiction.
Well, and let's just call a spade a spade. Getting prosecuted for a DUI offense is very, very expensive for that person, right? There's a lot of money that's made with the fines, the ARD, if you're able to get ARD. And so it's a moneymaker, the DUI. And I'm not saying, drunk driving is acceptable. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying, like, for us patients, that just, what I'm saying? This is a concern because you're going to make a considerable amount of money off of this DUI charge that this patient has.
And they often put signs up that say DUI, you can't afford it. And literally that's true. Here in Allegheny County, for example, if someone goes through the ARD system, which is for first-time offenders, you get your record expunged after it. You only lose your license for no longer than 90 days. But that can cost close to $3,000 in court costs, supervision fees, fines alone. And that's got nothing to do with attorney's fees and nothing to do with the time that you are spending going back and forth to court, doing safe driving classes, and so on and so forth.
Community service. They all have to do community service. We have a lot of ARD offenders that come to APA, Affinity Patient Advocacy. We support them. We're a nonprofit. They're trying to, whether if it was a patient, God forbid, or it was a drunk driving issue, we allow them to work with us at APA because, they need to do community service.
Certainly, depending on the county that you're in, community service is often tacked on. And this is another thing that people might not necessarily be aware of, but in Pennsylvania, we escalate our penalties for DUI very, very quickly. ARD is available to someone once every 10 years, basically. If you get a second DUI within that 10-year period of time, if it's a controlled substance DUI, that's a mandatory 90 days incarceration. If it's a third DUI within that period of time, whether it's controlled substances or alcohol, it's a mandatory 1 year in the state penitentiary. And I think that when people see how relatively light it is to have ARD and then a brief license suspension, they're not necessarily thinking, boy, if I get caught again, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. And if I get caught 2 more times, I'm going to state prison. So, DUI in Pennsylvania is very, very serious. It escalates very, very quickly. And if a motorist operates a motor vehicle while they're under a DUI suspension, that's called a 1543B violation, either 60 or 90 days mandatory in jail. So, and an additional year-long license suspension on top of that. So I see so many people, and not limited to cannabis consumers, primarily alcohol, because that's the majority of my DUI work, but so many people that just get behind the 8 ball because they get a DUI and then they get charged with driving under a suspended license, and then their license suspension just goes on and on and on. And if you get caught too many times driving under a suspended license, that turns into a misdemeanor charge with a mandatory period of incarceration. So, my best advice is to do everything that you possibly can to avoid that DUI, even if, you would get ARD for first-time offenders. And it might not be the most serious charge that's out there, but it can easily put a patient down a path of, endless license suspensions, going back and forth to court, mandatory minimum jail sentences. So do what you can to avoid that law enforcement encounter. And speaking of which, this is something that that I advise people. Our flower is available, dry leaf, herbs, nugs, whatever, but they don't come in airtight, smell-proof containers. You can smell it. So if you've got, you go to the dispensary and you pick up, some grassroots, some terrapin, some illyra, you've got, a couple of eighths, maybe an ounce worth of flower, and it's in your car, that officer is going to smell it. He's going to smell the fresh odor of cannabis. Now, any unused cannabis must be stored in its original dispensary packaging. So a patient cannot open up that container and dump it in a mason jar and then seal that mason jar. My best workaround, my best recommendation is to have a large enough mason jar or other smell-proof device. Put your original dispensary packaging in that mason jar or in that smell-proof bag, and then make sure that that is not stored anywhere near the driver's compartment. If you got to put it in your trunk.
Now, real quick, because here in PA there seems to be almost 3 layers of packaging, but you're referring to maybe the plastic that actually holds the medicine. I mean, you open the box, you open this, and then all of a sudden you're there. You don't have to keep it
in the box, but you got to keep it in that packaging. Okay. And in fact, the label from the dispensary is probably put on that box. Yeah. So if you're throwing the box away, peel the label off and put that label on your actual medicine. Because, one thing that I'm telling police officers is if my name is on that label, that means that I lawfully purchased it at the dispensary. There's no way for my name to get on that label unless it was a lawful transaction. So having that label that was from the dispensary and having your receipt, stored on your phone or, kept with your medicine is a good idea. But at least that label with my name on it proves that I lawfully purchased that product.
Very good. That's great advice. Lexa has told me to wrap it up a little bit ago, guys. I mean, Patrick, I have questions here. We could go on and on. We didn't even touch base about the concealed carry that we talked about prior.
Let's make a point of talking about that in the very near future, because I know that it's very important. Representative Wheatley, who is the prime sponsor of House Bill 50, the adult use legalization bill, wants to reach out to the Attorney General to see if there's something that we can do to motivate law enforcement to not aggressively try to jam up patients who are acting legally under Pennsylvania law but illegally under federal law. I'm not exactly sure how we're going to be able to do that unless we've got federal rescheduling or descheduling, but it's a very important issue that I think that especially our veteran community our sportsman community. A lot of people hunt and things like that. There's some, some very practical things that we need to talk about.
Absolutely. And I have one quick question. Actually, it's a scenario talking to a mother of a young teenager, considering placing her child on medical cannabis for symptoms related to cancer. But her concern is if my child is on medical cannabis for these symptoms, and we start looking at this child, my boy, to get his driver's license. I mean, have you come up with any of those kind of types of cases recently where, or is our medical marijuana program still too young for that kind of scenario to be a concern?
I have not seen that scenario come up yet. One answer is the patient registry is confidential, so there would be no way for anyone to know that young man or young woman was a medical cannabis patient unless volunteered or revealed. But of course, if I go, to take my driver's test, and the state trooper or whomever who is administering the test learns that I'm a medical cannabis patient, they're probably going to say, "Listen, if I let you get behind the wheel of that car, I'm going to have to investigate you for DUI." So it is a challenging scenario. And what I hate to say is the answer is, to conceal, to hide, to pretend that you're, not a medical cannabis patient. But for right now, that's the best answer I can come up with until we get some legislative relief via an amendment to our DUI statute.
I'll tell her that, or hopefully, Brenda, if you're going to watch this video, there's your answer. Anyway, folks, let's wrap this up. It's been a great conversation. Patrick, I apologize for my poor introduction. There's so many great things you guys are doing.
You didn't call me a jagoff.
Oh.
That's Pittsburgh for you.
Very good. Hey, I'm a Steelers fan, as you can see, so I know my Yuns.
Steelers, here we go.
That's right, baby. That's right. Ben's chalking it up. We'll talk about that another time too. And by the way, Patrick, I see you're also a drummer. I like to get behind the set myself, so we have some things in common. Oh,
fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely, my friend. We'll catch up on that sometime. See, take us out of here.
All righty. Thank you so much, Patrick, for being on today. I did want to mention also that I'd be happy to be involved with the patient side of the DUI legislation. As you may know or may not know, I sit on the board for the American Society of Cannabis Medicine. We're working on a descheduled federal bill for medical cannabis clinical research provisionals, so we're no longer handcuffed. Mm-hmm. So that, we come from obviously the place of, the medical side of things, but we also protect patients' rights and welfares through our nonprofit APA. So I would definitely like to be involved in any way because, this is a major, major concern for us as patients, selfishly, but also, all the patients we help. And here we are trying to kill ourselves to do research to support, IND submissions for drug development when our patients constantly worry about arrests, and DUIs. And, it's just too much. It's really too much. And these patients already have unmet medical needs, and they need this support with this amazing plant. And I'm not trying to get on a soapbox here, folks, but I want to help because this is, I obviously, I have a lot to say about this topic, and, I'm coming from a corporate place. So, at least I'm a little bit more credible, I guess, right?
I'll definitely follow up with you. What I can say is that, we have bipartisan support for amending the DUI law. But, as we see with anything going on in Harrisburg, it's impossible to do anything quickly. So It's going to be very important for all medical cannabis patients to engage their Pennsylvania state representative, to engage their Pennsylvania state senator, and say, I need to be protected.
Yes.
There's only so much that, lawmakers who are not my, representative or senator are going to be willing to listen to, some guy from Pittsburgh or, someone from the other side of the state. It is critical that our patients engage their representative and their senator. Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. They are obligated to protect their constituents. And, you know, as I said before, this is something that even law enforcement acknowledges has got to be addressed.
Okay. Thank
Very
you
good.
so much, Patrick. We really appreciate
Awesome
you. And we look forward to having you on again. Hopefully we'll have a sunny day.
Don't count on it.
No. I'm skipping off to Orlando tomorrow, so hoping to find some sun there. You know,
Yeah.
Next time around, we'll address the Second Amendment issues.
Yes, that would be
sounds
awesome.
great.
And
Sounds great.
And anytime, Patrick, if you want to come on and talk about certain things that are important that you need support from us to put you on, I'm happy to have you on, Patrick. We appreciate all of your support in our community and also with us in our companies. So thank you again for coming on.
It's my absolute pleasure and privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
All right, take care, guys.